Awesome. Thanks, Alex. That's awesome. So today we're going to kind of start off with a little presentation, and then we're going to do a demo of all of the stuff that we've been working on over the summer. So we'll start off just to give you guys an overview of what we're doing, kind of talk a little bit about what our brief was here, kind of what we came into this with, a little bit about us, talk about the prototypes that we initially did, some of the user testing, and then go into the changes that we made and kind of what we are looking forward to do going forward. So with that in mind, we'll go ahead and start off with a little more in-depth introduction of each of us. So if you want to kick it off, Nicole.
Yes. Hi, I'm Nicole. I came to Brooklyn Research to learn a little bit more about fabrication and physical computing. I received my bachelor's in visual arts and art history and focused on photography. And over the last year, I actually went to City Tech to learn more about lighting technology and emerging media. So when I'm not in front of a computer, I usually gallery hop, like to eat a lot of donuts, and I like to dance. I like to be in the middle of the dance floor. So, yeah.
Hi everyone, my name is Huiyi. I had a background in psychology and photography, and I'm currently studying in interactive telecommunication program in New York University. And I came here as someone who almost never played video games at all. And I was hoping to design a controller that I would want to play, and I think we did.
Yeah.
And when I'm not in front of the computer, you can always find me eating, cooking, and making some music. Yeah.
Hey, I'm Nick Wallace. So I likely also going to ITP, getting my master's degree there. I have a bachelor's in information systems from the University of Houston. So besides eating pizza, I feel like it's no coincidence that one of the things we're going to be doing tonight is making pizza.
Hey,
I love
I'm Nick
making
Wallace.
and eating pizza.
So I likely
also going
Echo.
But besides that, when I'm not in front of a computer or workbench, I generally spend my time rock climbing, hanging out outdoors, and doing outdoor stuff. Cool.
Hi, my name is Kathy. I think I'm the youngest of all three of you. So I'm currently an undergrad at NYU, Tandon School of Engineering. I'm also a BSMS student, so I'll be getting a bachelor's in integrated digital media and a master's in industrial engineering, hopefully. When I'm not sitting in front of a computer, I'm usually out and about wandering around with exploring food culture of New York. I came here initially thinking that I was going to do more software things, but from this group I've learned more about teamwork and physical computing. So yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. So we'll go ahead and kick it off, talk a little bit about what the kind of our objectives were coming into this and what we were looking to do. So as Alex mentioned, this was primarily kind of a research-driven approach to development and to this kind of summer project. And so we came in here initially with a research focus, looking at this kind of box of interaction, and if we were going to look into kind of new forms of interaction with controllers, kind of what is the history of some of these different controllers. And then use that as the basis for kind of building out where we wanted to go, and use that as a basis for the prototypes that we were going to make and the development that we were going to do, and kind of take a top-down approach from that side. So we'll play you guys a little video that we made covering that. Awesome. So all the stuff you guys just saw in that video was footage from our playtest, the user test that we did a few weeks ago, a month ago. Yeah, it seems like yesterday, a few weeks ago. And so this is kind of just a quick roadmap of what we were working on this summer, right? Is spending about a month doing the research, a little bit of time prototyping, playtesting, and then kind of moving those changes forward. So yeah, you guys saw kind of a quick shot of the pulp pad and the controller as they're known. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Kathy to kick it off with the research. Zach, that's Nicole.
Oh,
Nicole's
that's
kicking
me.
off with
Yeah.
the research.
Yeah, so to kick off the research, we all agreed that it would be a great idea to go to the Chinatown Fair Arcade for some inspiration. So you can see here we're playing different shooting games, different rhythm games, and like in the middle, there's like the modern take on Space Invaders. If you see the right of it, there's like this DJ game where they're using knobs and buttons. So yeah.
Awesome.
So within the brief history of controllers, we should start from the very beginning, which is the pre-1970s. So during this time, the only games that were available were to academic research facilities, such as MIT and other universities that had their first computer running, which is the PDB-10. However, the first actual game was Tennis for Two, which was played on a screen of an oscilloscope. So knobs, paddles, and joysticks were introduced in the 70s and 80s. So for the Atari 2600, which was produced in 1977, the joystick and driving controllers were introduced. And then by 1982, mice, trackballs, and keyboards were introduced in the Atari 5200. And by 1986, gamepads were invented in the Atari 7200. So joysticks are adaptable and easy to learn, and the first example of a generic controller, and one that can be used in many different games, not just one. By 1982, we have the D-pad and the gamepad, which was first introduced in the NES controller. So the NES controller has a D-pad and two buttons that connect through a wire, and it enables quick and accurate control for each player. And then by the 1990s, the D-pad was not very relevant, or it didn't really serve a purpose for three-dimensional games. That's why an analog stick would be more easy to use in a 3D environment. So because the D-pad is very clumsy and slow, it just needed an extra control scheme. And by then, the N64 or the Nintendo 64 was a controller, the first controller to provide an analog stick in the center, and enables the user to provide a vector as a directional input. And by the late 1990s, there was an introduction to haptic feedback, which is a physical output exerted onto the player or user, and it usually is a controller that shakes or rumbles. The N64 is the first controller to implement haptic feedback. They had a separate device that you would put into the N64, and it would give you. It was known as the Rumble Pack. And the first game to implement haptic feedback is the Star Fox 64 game, and it's now common in most controllers. So other video game arcade controllers, such as rhythm games, are games where players have to simulate a certain aspect of music and dance, such as strumming a specified guitar. It's developed on the principle of taking a complex musical task and simplifying it to a level that is accessible by a computer. So nowadays, our new immersions of video games is like touchscreens, which help users understand interaction that is done through a finger, a stylus, or any special type of thumb pad, and it really depends on what level of accuracy is required. Some games use these touchscreens as another button, or that they are designed around the touchscreen that is playable, wouldn't be playable without the touchscreen. And there are two types of interaction within a touchscreen. It can be used as a pointer or a gesture recognition. So current new controllers, such as the Nintendo Switch, which was released in 2017, is a better iteration of the Wii U, a hybrid video game console. It was introduced as a handheld and tabletop hybrid, but because the Nintendo Switch is very capable and flexible in any types of its forms that you see on the top of the screen, it's very dependent on how the console is used by its user. It's not the user is not restricted by one form. He or she can play within those three forms shown above.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, so when we look at the history of controllers, we can already sort of see that it is developing towards better and better ergonomics. And for those who are not familiar with the concept of ergonomic, it is study of designing or arranging product systems so that they fit the people who use them. So we did more research into the ergonomic of game controllers, and here are just some of the heuristics that came across in our research and also inform our design of the controllers later in the process. So the first of heuristics being that the most frequent action should be in the most accessible places and match primary control group of a player's hand. So if we look at our fingers, each fingers have different level of flexibility and precision, like the thumb and the index being the most flexible ones. So when we design a controller, we want to design it so that our primary fingers can be used in an accessible ways. If we look at the Xbox 360 controller, we can see that the green buttons on the picture is the most frequently used buttons, which being the joystick and the AB button, and they are placed at the most accessible positions and designed to be pressed with the thumb. And the next important heuristic is that it's about feedback. So feedback is important because it builds a mental model of any interactive object in the player's head. It answers on what is the question. So whenever a user do anything, it needs some sort of feedback to let him know you did that and like what is it. And the three most common feedbacks are audio, visual, and tactile. And in terms of the sizing of controllers, the study on ergonomic found that the buttons need to be large enough in width and diameter to facilitate the 95 percentile of the users, and also the distance between the buttons should be large enough so that they can be pressed individually by 95% of the people. And this is just a very bad example of of a controllers, which goes totally opposite to these two principles. So like the buttons are pretty small on the right, so for people with large hands, it's really hard to press it, and also like they're very close together, so it's hard for people to press individually. And also like the shape of the controller is hard to hold and everything. So these controllers get rid of like pretty soon after released. And you can go to the next. Yeah, so here's just like kind of evolution of game controllers, and on picture they're like 1989 Sega Genesis, 2000 Xbox, 2005 Xbox 360, and 2013 PS4. And people who study ergonomic, they evaluate the ergonomics performance on these four controllers according to the guideline of the measurement of men and women. So if you look at the form here, you can see over the years, like among the four controllers, the total score of ergonomic performance getting higher and higher. So like the most left column is like the most recent controllers, and the most right being the oldest. So, yeah, just saying like controllers having experienced considerable economic development over time to fit the anthropometrics of a variety of users. Yeah, and as we researching on economic of controllers, we start to look outside the range of game controllers and to look at other everyday object we used. So like there's one time Nick bringing this this blender he owned at home, and it just feels so great. It has like the perfect ergonomic. It has a comfortable grip and has a speed control near the thumb. And so basically you grab it like this, and you can like execute 3 functions at the same time, and just like feels so comfortable and satisfying to use. And like from that point, we started to think like maybe we should think outside the box of just like D-pad, like the standard game controllers, and we started to look at all sort of kitchen tools, and we found it's a really great inspiration for designing different gestures and to examine like the economics behind these kitchen tools. So like at one point, each of us bringing different kitchen tools we own at home, and we brought in a rolling pin, pizza cutter, juicers, blender, and muster and passer, and just to playing them around and just to feel them, and see how they can inform us to design our game controllers.
Just takeaways. Go ahead.
Yeah, so just a few takeaways from the research, from our whole research section. So I guess the first takeaway is that the controllers there are all kinds of controllers popping up in the history, but the controllers actually live on. Those can be standardized to a variety of different games. A second takeaway is that like the controllers throughout the history have evolved towards better and better ergonomics.
I'm going to talk a little bit about the process. So the first section is the early design and development. So we asked, what do we want? What actually makes a controller interesting? Like, what should we be making here? So we were discussing all the important qualities. Like first, we wanted it to be a standardized controller, so something that can adapt to different games. We wanted something intuitive, so as soon as you pick it up, like you understand what action, like what button does what. Something that's masterable, meaning like it might be difficult at first. Maybe it's a little weird, but then after a little bit, you get the hang of it, and you're like, oh wow, this is really really fun. So fun, also being a great quality, and something novel, something that we haven't seen before. And we also were focusing on trying to create a controller that had the standard D-pad and A/B button controller mapping. And so that's when we were looking at all the kitchen appliances. We were looking for all those different gestures that can translate into like a button press. And I will talk about the pulp pad. So early on, we were looking at the Xbox, the new Xbox adaptive controller. If you guys haven't seen that before, it's actually like this, you can plug in different peripherals into it, and that was really a huge inspiration for us, where we wanted to use non-invasive sensors so that we would also have the ability to switch out different peripherals. But we really stuck with the juicers because it's just so much fun with the juicers. So once we got in the juicer, we opened it up and took it apart to see like how it was working inside. And we saw that, you know, the two contacts that meet is when the juicer is juicing. And using the non-invasive sensors also was a safer route. We didn't want to hardwire into there, and we would have to worry about messing with the mains voltage. And so also when those contacts meet, we assumed that we would be sending the signal to the teensy, which would trigger a keyboard press. And using the non-invasive sensors wasn't exactly easy from the get-go. We realized early on that there was a lot of noise and there was a lot of coding that we had to do to smooth out those values, especially to play like a rhythm-based game where the timing is essential. So one of the first iterations of the code, one short juice press would equal like 59 clicks, and as you can see in the GIF right here. And we also found out that if the wires would cross, the non-invasive sensor would pick up the signal of the other juicer. So Nick, I'm gonna hand it over to Nick, who can tell you about this math code.
I'm going to try not to bore you to death with this, but yeah, just real quick. So like Nicole was mentioning, one of the biggest challenges that we had going into this, or kind of getting into these non-invasive current sensors, is the way that these work. I'm just going to pick one of these up. So on the back of this is the power cord, and you have one of these guys right here, and it's just looped around the actual wires that are plugged in. So what happens is when you press one of these guys, or one of the juicers, there is current that's sent through the line, and that sensor sends it to the Arduino or the teensy in our case, and gets an input. But it turns out that that's a super noisy input. And so a lot of the early kind of development of this was just spent figuring out a way to get to the signal out of the noise, and finding a way to kind of like average out some of those values. And essentially what we ended up doing was, when they all powered on the first time, getting a baseline value for them, kind of a baseline reading when they first turned on, and then using that as a way to kind of go forward. So if that's the baseline, then when somebody presses on it, it gets a much higher reading, and we can kind of do some math with regards to what the baseline is, and what the current value is, to get a sense of that. And then also just creating a running average, and playing with how many values we needed in there. And so it turned out 6 or 7 values was a good amount, in terms of the running average, to get a kind of a smooth, consistent input value on that as well. So yeah, if anyone has any questions about that, I'm happy to bore you to death and talk about this afterward. But yeah, so we'll talk a little bit about the other prototype, was the conroller. So that's this nice rolling pin right here, which you guys will see the current versions in the back over there right now. So for this guy, this was initially we had the rolling pin, and we had this idea of, we want to take the rolling pin and map that movement to like an arcade style game. And one of the biggest kind of hurdles was just trying to figure out a good way to get that forward and backward movement reliably. And we messed around with a variety of different sensors. Initially, we thought accelerometers were the way to go, and then it turned out after a lot of work with those, that it was pretty frustrating. Ended up settling on using a rotary encoder to track that motion. Yeah, and then there was kind of some debate around, okay, so do we split it in half and try to stick everything in there? Do we like core one side out and put it in there? And which is what we ended up doing. So coring it out, kind of stuffing a rotary encoder in there to capture that motion. So what you're looking at here is, so this is we testing just the rotary encoder with the handle on it, kind of rolling it, getting that test. And then our very, very initial prototype, we had glued a button to the handle, because we were trying to figure out a way to add like a fire functionality or some kind of other functionality to it, and we had ideas around pushing the handles and some other stuff that didn't pan out. But yeah, and so then with this rolling pin, we're like, okay, so we have this rolling pin and we can track the motion, and that's great and all, and we can roll dough with it, but like, what do you do with dough? So we like I wanted to make pizza. So so we ended up adding a couple other elements to this. So using relays, these power tails to add a way to blend tomato sauce and to grate cheese as well for part of that. So going into the user testing, so there turned out to be a few challenges with this. So these super slow GIFs. So it turned out that people did not really love trying to go up and down and left and right, right. So the way that we designed it was that when you pushed up, your ship would move right, and when you went down, the ship would move left, and that worked for some people and not for others. And then the movement wasn't super smooth, so you kind of had this like really choppy movement to move your character, which didn't really work well when you were rolling dough. It like kind of worked in the game, but it didn't work super well when you were rolling dough. And then, so the button that was originally on the handle, we ended up moving to a foot button, which was great because it worked really well until you did it about 10 times, and then your foot and your calves started cramping, and you didn't want to play anymore. So yeah, moving forward, that was kind of one of the takeaways there. So we'll get into, we'll talk a little bit more about the user test now.
So we had our playtest event. For those of you who are in the audience, thank you for coming to our playtest event, and thank you again for coming to our final presentation. So the lessons that we learned from this playtest event is, for the poll pad at least, that everyone likes a tactile response, and everyone likes the result that there's a reward at the end, and that there's a haptile feedback, and there's an intuitive controller interface, so it's easy to learn. However, the fruits kept falling off, and it's very frustrating to control the menu because there's only 4 juicers, and you had to like reach over to the computer to like start playing, and there's not enough feedback if you miss certain moves. The only feedback you'd be getting is if you're hitting the juicers at the right time with the fruit on it. For the controller, everyone likes that multitask function and the interactive function compared to a standard controller. However, the motion or the mapping of the rolling pin is not reflected well in the physical world and in the virtual world. And the foot pedal seems to be very disconnected for the rest of the controller because everything about the controller, at least, was waist up until we put the foot pedal on the floor. And like I said before, the mapping of the up and down motion was not correlating to the left and right motion of the sprite. So and then in these 4 GIFs here is the player behavior between 4 different people. So on the top left hand corner, you see that the first player is more doing of the short strokes and stepping rapidly with for the floor pedal. And then the second player is also using short strokes while playing as well to get more distance on the screen. However, his orientation of the controller is different from player 1. Player 1 wants to have the same mapping as the screen, so it makes it more easier for her to play. But however, when you see the bottom left-hand corner of player 3, she's more or less using longer strokes, but she's moving in different directions so that she can get more leverage on how to move the sprite. And then the last person on the bottom right-hand corner is still using shorter strokes, but he's moving much more faster to control the sprite moving left and right. So the next steps after this playtest is to add tactile feedback. People do love the vibration feedback from the juicer and the tactile feelings from the fruit. And for the controller, we want to make sure that the mapping is more natural. Some players found that the mapping of the roller is not natural to the mapping of the game, and just smoother controls in both controllers. Some people found that the movement, at least for the controller, is a little too slow, while they're moving a bit faster in real life.
All right. So I'm happy to talk about all the changes we made after the playtest. And you can see what we've been working on for the past month. First, we'll talk about the new version of the pulp pad. We're still thinking about the Xbox adaptive controller, and so we decided to create this modular control box. The first prototype had two separate tenses, one for each set of juicers, but this time around we have it all, like the two sets in to one teensy. We also created the schematic in Eagle and milled out the PCB board and created an acrylic housing. So you can see it after the presentation up here. And we also created new housing for it. In the playtest, one of the juicers actually broke because it slipped off the table, and we should have prevented that by creating the housing earlier. But now we have two different colors. We have the LED diffusing one on the right over here, and like a black top, clear-sided one, so that you can actually see the LEDs that glow. And we also have our NFOI branding on it.
Sorry, bear with me. My computer's freezing.
Oh.
There we go.
Yeah. And we also embedded LED strips into each of the juicer bottoms. So once you press down, you'll see it light up, and that's just to add an extra visual feedback. And we also added the ice crusher start buttons so that you wouldn't have to reach over onto a laptop and press enter. And you can also have crushed ice for your once warm cocktail. Yeah.
Gotta have ice. Gotta have ice.
Ice.
Cool. So the second or this new prototype for the controller is a little bit different. So rather than going with an already existing rolling pin and coring it out, we kind of built this one up from the ground up, right? So at this point, it's based out of an acrylic tube, and we laser cut out these various kind of gears and gear systems in there, so that we actually have the same rotary encoder, right? And so at this point, what happens is this guy lives inside of the tube. When you spin the tube, it rotates the gear on there and gives you the motion for the system to get a forward and backwards reading. So Nicole, this is your baby, so I'm gonna let you do this one.
I spent a lot of time modeling different handles. We wanted to make it more ergonomic, and I was just playing around with the 3D printer, so there's a lot of different versions. We also wanted to add that haptic feedback, so we have a section cored out inside the handle so that you can embed the motor, and we also added like a rubberized grip, so it has a nice, tactile feel to it, and we embedded a chrome-plated momentary button to replace that foot pedal that no one really liked. So, yeah. Yeah, and we did take into consideration that a lot of people did not like this up and down, like translating the up and down motion of the rolling pin. So we were looking for different games, but we couldn't quite find one.
Yeah, I think we had we were kind of going for simple arcade games that were like a fixed screen with a single axis, and it turns out that because old arcade cabinets are like these vertical screens, most of them you were moving the character along the bottom and not along the side, or any ones that you were moving kind of on this, y-axis here, generally also had an x-axis. So we tried flipping Galaga on its, like literally turning the computer on its side and playing it, and it worked, but it just was kind of like, yeah, this is not any better than having it back. So I think that's kind of one of the next steps to work on here as well. Yeah. Oh yeah, it's called next steps. Look at that. Awesome. Let's see if we can get to the next slide if my computer will. Yeah. Oh, 2 slides. There we go.
Yep. Okay, so we had these 2 prototypes, but why do we make them, and what is special about them that makes them different from like standard game controllers? And we think there are a few things that is unique about this thing and make it like different. And the first thing being that with these 2 controllers we designed, we were able to create physical rewarding out of the virtual world. Now if we take a step back and think about why we love video games, it's a few things. It's because it provides rewarding for good behaviors. It gives us emotional impact, and it gives us pleasure from learning curve, and also because it has rewarding from the social behaviors. So basically, when we're playing video games, our brain is like releasing dopamine like crazy. And it's exactly because of that when most people get this kind of post-game depression when they're done playing games. Like, I don't play games a lot, which I mentioned before, but it's not because I think game is not fun. It's because every time I play game, I feel this kind of emptiness and depressed. So I just can't handle it, so I don't play game. But we were thinking like this kind of post-game depression happens because all the rewards I just mentioned, they stayed in the virtual world. When you're done playing game and the rewards are gone. But why does it have to be? Why can't we extend the virtual rewards into the physical world? And that's exactly what we did. So with these game pub and controllers, we're able to earn points while playing games. And after you play the games, you get a physical rewarding of food and juice. And the next thing that's special about it is the novel gestures for interaction. If you look at the standard game controllers, they're basically one single gesture, which is pressing, pressing, and pressing. But with this set of controllers, we incorporate different gestures, like learning from kitchen tools, which involves grabbing, grip, pressing, roll, and potentially more. And the last thing that is interesting about these controllers is that with the mechanism we just talked about using the non-invasive current sensor, there's potential that we can turn any discrete state electricity appliances into a controllers or use it in a Internet of Things. And it doesn't have to be a juicer or rolling pin. It can be simply be twitched a little bit, and we can use it on like power tools and like dryers and anything you can think of, and we turn all these things into the network. Yeah, so we have two working prototypes. It's great, but we have something in mind that we want to do in the next step. And for the pop pad, which is other juices over there, we're thinking of making the dynamic control mapping on a modular box, so you can simply press a button or turn a knob, and you can map it into different input. And the second thing is we want to develop a custom game for the controllers, because none of us are game developers and we have limited time here. So like we're thinking that if we could incorporate like the amount of juice into a game, and we can program customized feedback with the game, it will be push it to the next level, and it would be great. And for the controller, which are the rolling pins, we also want to develop a custom game for it. As Nick mentioned, so like the problem we have now with the rolling pin is that it's only single axis and going up and down, and we can't really find a lot of games that just play with us. So if we can have a customized design game that's doing up and down motions, it will be work better for the controllers. And also, if we can develop custom game, we can build trigger haptic events according to what happened in the games. And the second thing we wanted to do to improve this controller is that we want to somehow add left and right axis with the accelerometer, so we don't have to only play one axis up and down game. And we also want to make the grip more ergonomic, so it feels better to roll and grip. And also we want to somehow improve the button situation, because now we're using the button on the handles as a shooting button, but we're trying to think of a more ergonomic, a better way to act that functions. Yeah, so if you have any ideas, please let us know, and we're happy to collaborate. And if you are a game developers, please talk to us. We need you.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for coming out. Thanks for listening to us. So before we jump into demoing these guys and letting you guys make some juice and some pizzas, we'd love to take questions. Yeah, what do you guys want to know? And Daria's got the mic over here, so if you have a question, raise your hand and we'll get the mic over to you.
I know this wasn't part of the plan that you guys were thinking of, but was there any like non-game context things that sort of came up naturally that you thought about when you're developing, or anything that you were thinking of that this could bridge out for in some non-game context, or as a controller or interface device? Just curious.
I don't know why I kept, we were talking about the sort of IoT applications of things, and I kept thinking of like AC units and with a current sensor on it, and some way to like control an AC unit with a current sensor. I don't know. I just think there's like, there's some interesting applications there, but no, other than that, no.
Anyone else?
I'm not quite sure how to articulate the question, but I just sort of want to like tease out some stuff.
Sure.
Maybe it'll, answer this however you feel like. But I'm really interested in the using kitchen appliances for this, and I think that's especially if sort of the game design echoes that a little bit. I think there's a lot of like really rich stuff to explore there. Is this something that you imagine, like, were you trying to design something that would be universalized in the way that like an Xbox controller would be, or is this something that you sort of had in mind, like there is a game that is going to be played using this controller and that game has yet to be designed, but where I guess did you draw the line there? How did you see that?
I think early
out?
on, I knew in my heart that I needed to make a DDR, like a rhythm-based game, and because that's just like I grew up in the arcade playing DDR, so I think that setup, like using these juicers, came really natural to me. But I think we were thinking about pitching it to juice companies or I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was part of when we talked about kind of the next steps is making this a little bit more modular. So at the moment, right, the way that it's set up is you have each one of these, like pressing each one of these juicers corresponds to basically a keyboard press, right? It's like an HID device. It corresponds to like a left, right, up, and down. And so being able to kind of change the mapping on the fly and make it accessible or make it work in more games, I think that was definitely something that we were interested in, yeah. But I think we all also, loved the DDR. There was something really fun about like taking a game that you normally play with your feet and then playing it with your hands as well.
Yeah, we also in the design of the housing, we talked about different juicer layouts, so that if, I don't know, say in Guitar Hero, it's all in one straight line, so maybe it would match up better to the game. But maybe there's a fighting game we can do, or another shooting game, or I don't know. It's really, there's so many possibilities, and we're hoping to develop a game for that.
There's
Yeah.
one that I can't remember the name of it. I've only played it once, but there's like a Switch game that like you are an assembly line worker in a kitchen.
It's called Overcooked.
Overcooked. That's
Yeah.
it.
Just,
Yeah. I just
Yeah.
spent the whole time thinking about that. And I'm like,
yeah, I think the goal initially for us was to design a more universal and standardized controllers for a lot of games. But as we progress, we realize the relationship between game controllers and games, like the games are sort of limited by what other controllers out there. So if we're designing something totally new and we want to use the full potential of the controllers, we might need a customized game that's not existing. And yeah.
Can you guys, you sort of brought up a little bit in your presentation, but can you talk about some of the controllers or like that you were thinking of before you came onto the juicer and the roller, of like why, like your thoughts on what the other ones that didn't work, like the mortar pestle or the other type of things that you sort of, or like what didn't work about them, or what brought you to narrow on these as opposed to the other potential utensils or multi-use controllers?
So like the example that you brought up, which is the mortar and pestle, it's like similar to how a joystick works on a standard controller. So a controller, the joystick on a controller rotates on like a rotational device, and because you're using the mortar and pestle, like you're just rotating a mortar on top of the pestle, it just simulates the same actions or the same ergonomics as the joystick, but it just doesn't feel novel enough to make something like big out of it. So that's why we scrapped the idea and decided to use juicers, because, well, one, juicers are not really used outside of its context in the kitchen, and a mortar and pestle can be used in a science lab or like a kitchen itself. So trying to take something out of its context and it's like reinventing the wheel. It makes it more novel and it makes it more fun, because in all honesty, game controllers haven't changed in the last 20 years. Everything's relatively the same. You have your A, B button and your D-pad and your joystick. And because this is a novel like instrument of its own, people would rather enjoy a new experience than doing the same thing over and over again.
Yeah, I think that's a good point around the so like the rolling pin. We also had a pizza cutter, and so that was one thing. It was like we kind of playing with those, and we're like, oh, the movement here is actually pretty similar. And so that was like part of the process for that was I think it was Nicole or Huiyi mentioned that we brought in just a bunch of stuff from home. So all of us were like, okay, go home and bring 3 or 4 different things from your kitchen, and we just kind of sat there and tried it, and it was like, and the rolling pin was like, oh, that feels good, and the pizza cutter, that feels good, but it's kind of the same motion. And so part of the process of narrowing down like what is the action we like, and like what is the kind of like what do we want that interaction to be like, yeah, that was part of it as well, I think.
I think with the pizza cutter, we were also kind of having difficulty thinking about the housing of it. Like we would have to just inject the rotary encoder, but like maybe there would be wires hanging out, and it would be kind of difficult to disguise, like make it look neat and compact, and yeah.
Right.
We also considered like our like target audience. Like we can't always assume that our target audience is around the same age group. So because the pizza cutter is technically like a sharp object, we didn't want like someone at a playtest who is like obviously not an adult to like cut their fingers off. So yeah.
Yeah. I think we were playing with like they had this idea of like, oh, let's get knives on a cutting board, and then it was like, yeah, maybe we shouldn't do that. Right. You just, yeah, this is kind of what you're saying. Is like you're going to be
Sprinkle it
distracted
in.
watching the screen, playing the game, and then you just lose a finger. Yeah, that'd be bad. So, yeah.
Any other questions?
This isn't so much as a question as much as a thought, but you guys were mentioning about how traditional game controllers are press, and you were looking at more novel gestures. and it seems like you guys are already touching on this in the games that you decided to apply here, but both of those are essentially like arcade games, and arcade games are places where they do explore more, a lot like different types of movements. So even like mentioning something like Street Fighter, when you look at that as an arcade game, they have 6 buttons as opposed to the traditional like 4 buttons. And that, like the first thing I saw looking at these juicers is that it resembles a D-pad. So if you're looking at other games that you want to adapt to that, going to visit those places, seeing how they resolve like the idea of like how something that only has one range of movement can be minorly changed, that might give you some other ideas just to other games that you can apply to these that, you know, you either in terms of the layout rather than the actual tools, like there is some formatic constructions that I think you might find some similarities of new games that you can play. Yeah, that's all I got.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah,
Let's
thanks.
explain.
I also have a question. So after you decided to choose these 2 devices, I can just imagine you probably went home and you were like maybe cooking at home or went to some restaurant. Did you have like after that some ideas about other kitchen tools that you like might use for some games? Like did you have this like sparks of like imagination, like hey, this would be amazing for this game?
I think we showed that image of that the immersion blender that I had, and I think like the whole time, because it looks kind of like a gun grip, and I was just like, I really wanted to play like light gun games with immersion blenders, and was imagining like an immersion blender in each hand as you were like shooting the game or something like that. I don't know, you're like making pesto or something. I'm not sure what you're blending, but you know, something like that. Yeah, definitely like just being at home and like. Another one, I guess this kind of goes back to the knives one, is like a mandolin, like the thing for like making really thin slices of stuff.
Also
is like doing that
dangerous.
as like a fruit ninja kind of thing with a mandolin, but
Yeah.
it's also a really easy way to lose part of your finger. so we nixed that one too, but yeah.
Yeah, for me, not even kitchen tools. So like when I using glue guns or power tools, I keep thinking of like using it as shooting game or something.
Yeah.
I just wanted to know, like, so far I've seen like a lot of external rewards. I mean, you guys touched on how games don't give you an actual like physical like reward, so you guys try to solve the problem by, you know, you create something at the end of it. But were there any sort of intrinsic rewards you guys were trying to explore with, you know, the interactions that, you know, by like playing the game, what intrinsic rewards do you would get?
Can you expand a little bit more in terms of when you're saying intrinsic rewards in playing the game?
I mean, because I'm comparing to like modern games. They try to like expand the amount of like interaction you'd be having with like the characters, where like the game itself. So it wouldn't just be about, you know, pressing the buttons. It would be like I'm solving this complex problem, and I'd make a relationship with the characters. Or I'd learn something about myself, you know, through the game or the interaction. So
I think that might be like part of the next step is like working with a game developer, where we can customize that and maybe address that and have a whole different narrative with juicing or rolling out dough. I think the options, that's definitely something that we'll think about.
Yeah, I think it totally makes sense. Like, because our project mainly focus on the controllers, but if we can, in the next step, if we can look into game itself in partnership with like game developers, we can explore more of that aspect, I think.
yeah, because I do like the potential for you guys looking for new ways to have a physical interaction. You could develop a new intrinsic interaction with like, you know, because you have to do something different now. Now you could probably get like a different reward from like, because now I'm actually thinking about what I'm using, you know, and what am I getting out of that, you know? So. that's something that-
Yeah.
That's that was more that's kind of
Yeah.
related to that. It's just like, I mean, most video game controllers, you know, there's the input, which is pressing the button, and there's the output, which is whatever happens on the screen. And you guys sort of have 2 separate outputs. You have what's happening on the screen and the juice or the pizza dough or whatever. And did you find that, like, first of all, did you sort of think of one as primary and one as secondary? Or did you find that one sort of got in the way of the other? You kind of touched on that with like chopping something and accidentally cutting off a finger because you're looking at the screen. And if so, is that something that you think would be sort of tied up by like a game design and like incorporating that secondary output?
Yeah,
into
sure.
Design.
Yeah, I mean, I think to be totally honest with you, when I was just like when we were starting to kind of like develop these and write code for these, I was like, just work. I was like, just work in the game, and yeah, I think it kind of evolved over time, and I think like the user test with the controller specifically was a really good lesson in that, because it worked well in the game when you weren't actually rolling dough. Like we had spent a lot of time testing the controller without actually rolling dough with it, and then it was like when you started rolling dough with it, it was like, oh wait, this is actually way harder, because we found that like there were certain people that were just only focused on the game, and then other people that were only focused on sort of getting their dough perfect, and it was really hard to kind of balance that back and forth, right? The juicers were a little bit. I found they were a little bit kind of easier to balance that aspect of it, but I mean, I definitely think that is, something we had in mind, and kind of part of why we want to kind of build a custom game going forward, something like that. Yeah.
Anyone else? No. So thank you so much for your questions, and I think we're closing QA.
Awesome. Thank you.
Now we can test the devices.
Okay.
All right.
Cool. Awesome.
Cool.
Thank you guys.
Thank you.
It's been really cool, like, have, this is so hard.